Now, as everybody knows, we recently got our first in-depth look at Borderlands 4 from the Game Awards, but shortly after we got so much more information straight from the developers and Randy Pitchford, and this information is not to take lightly. This is really going to set the pace and give us an idea of how the open world, the movement system, and other gameplay mechanics are going to go. Now, this was done strictly with the interview with Randy Pitchford, and what he says here is pretty insane. Starts off by prefacing Borderlands 3. You know, with the idea of going to different planets, it was more compartmentalized, and it felt a little less open, a little more linear to some degree for an open world title, while Borderlands 4 is the most open and free the franchise has ever gone, according to Pitchford. He states, when you look at specific scenes in the trailer, you can actually see these characters looking out at a vista, different zones, different areas, any building, mountain, thing you see way out in the distance in the scene, it is completely playable space. Now, what does this mean exactly? He does kind of preface this with, you know, he doesn't like stating really that this is open world, because open world, the statement open world for a video game is very open-ended. It could literally mean many different things. To him, every video game we've ever played, when you see things in the distance, it's a backdrop. He states, well, in Borderlands 4, everything we're seeing is actually playable space that we can go to and reach without a load time. That is insane. Without load time, this is going to switch up a lot of things. This is going to switch up farming bosses. This is going to switch up farming runs overall, as well as how we maneuver around the maps. Now, as we know, there's a newer introduction to vehicles. Vehicles are going to have a bigger purpose and meaning in Borderlands 4. And here's the thing. I don't like driving sequences in the Borderlands franchise. I think it just, you know, cuts up the pace and slows down the gameplay. But in Borderlands 4, with what he's stating and how vast and big these worlds are going to be, I think it's going to be workable. We're just going to have to find out. There better be a lot of new use stations and save points in different areas, checkpoints everywhere, in my opinion, because I'm not going to want to go across the map just to farm. So I don't know how the farming's going to work. It's super interesting to see. I think it's going to be completely different than we've seen ever in the franchise. Now, the person who was interviewing him came back at him and said, well, you know, the far off mountains, the towers, everything in the scene is playable space that you can reach, right? Does that mean the moon? All Randy had to say was everything in the scene. Every single thing in the scene you can go to without a loading screen, and it is playable space. Now, I don't think this is as big of a deal as we think, like, okay, great, we can just fly off and, you know, go to a moon and whatever. I do think there's going to be somewhat of a cinematic loading screen, kind of like how we see in the Spider-Man titles, as well as Starfield. You know, there's going to be a little bit of a cinematic scene, but it's going to cause it to be a little bit more seamless, you know? So furthermore, on the point of all these scenes, every scene, everything is explorable and reachable. One of the challenges with the term open world is kind of like what I touched on at the beginning, is other games have done it completely different. And with that, there's things that the Borderlands team are doing completely different, and they're doing things that no one has ever done before, according to them. But they also recognize that there are things that they don't do because it's Borderlands, things that they can't do, they can't implement for an open world. And I like that. Part of that is there are going to be out of bounds areas. There's going to be linear zones in different areas that you can't technically traverse, and it's understandable to be able to build a world. Now, furthermore, having a big open world that's seamless, no loading screens, every place is reachable, is that a good thing if the world is completely empty? Well, with Borderlands 4, they really want to focus on how combat is the biggest dynamic of the titles, and they care a lot about that, and I do like that. I do like that they state that and that he says that, because that is a big part of how the worlds pan out. Going to different areas, enemies spawn in, whether it's mini bosses, farmable bosses, mainline bosses from the story. He says all of this is a big implementation on this open world and this seamless world, and he's implemented this open world concept where everything is reachable, but the world is going to be completely packed to the brim. He states that this is actually the biggest and most filled worlds that they have ever made in the franchise. I mean, it makes sense when they're making a newer title on the next-gen consoles, and Borderlands 3 came out so many years ago, so the technological advancements from Borderlands 3 to Borderlands 4 is so much more advanced, so it makes sense that they could go this route. But the biggest thing, like I said, is he's stating that these worlds are going to be filled and packed to the brim, and they're actually going to have purpose. They're not just filled with AI and just jumbled up copy pasted assets that you see on other planets in different areas. Sure, there's going to be some of that. Every game has it, but different areas are going to have purpose, and they're going to feel alive and have a meaning to them and have a different feel to them. I think this is great, because here's the thing, guys, a game can make the biggest open world, but if it's not filled and packed to the brim and unique in all these different zones, what is the purpose of this world? I really think Starfield kind of took the crown on this. Yes, their worlds were seamless, they were open world, there wasn't really any loading screen like I talk about. They have the cinematic loading screens, but a lot of the assets and a lot of the worlds felt completely the same. As we know with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and the Borderlands franchise overall, each planet has its own different vibe and different feel, and I really think that's kind of how they're going to go with Borderlands 4. Are there going to be less planets? We don't know. You know, with how expansive this game is going to be, are they going to cut down on the amount of locations we can go to just because each location is so big and vast? Or are two locations going to be seamlessly tied together within one gigantic zone? We don't know, but that's interesting to think about. The biggest thing is the farming situation. I really do not like the save quit farming. Is it bad? No, especially if you have a powerful SSD and a powerful computer, or even an SSD on a console. You can farm pretty fast nowadays, but overall, I don't like that system. I want to see it reworked, and he talks about that it's going to be completely different this time around, which is super interesting to me. Now, we do know when it comes to movement, again, new vehicles have implemented. We've seen this in the trailer, but they also have brought in a new grappling hook system. Biggest reason for this is the movement tech overall is going to be completely changed. He talks about how they brought in the butt stomp from the pre-sequel, and this time around they're adding a few more that are just seamlessly connected. You know, you play Borderlands 3, you go back to 2, there's different mechanics, the mantling system, the stomp mechanic that isn't in the title that you missed. So this time around they're implementing everything from the previous titles, as well as bringing in new movement tech overall and the grappling hook. He does state that the grappling hook is not going to be called the grappling hook. They love to have their own names for things, so they're going to switch it up. I like that Borderlands fashion. Who knows what it's going to be named, but the biggest thing is, to me, putting all this together based off of what he says. Again, I really appreciate Randy Pitchford. He is very honest in his communication, and he doesn't overhype stuff. But the interesting thing is, he states that they brought in this grappling hook and all these systems because how big the world is going to be. Now, guys, you got to think about it. The world is not just going to be a plain, an open big plain. He was stating towers, mountains, buildings. Everything you see is completely reachable and playable space. This means these worlds are going to have versatility and verticality. It's not going to be just straight linear. We're going to have a lot of vertical changes, a lot of vertical areas up on mountains, different platforms, buildings, whatever it may be. So the world isn't just going to be an open plain. There's going to be levels to it as well, which is super interesting. I love that because you could just go up on top of a city and you're like up on a high zone, or you're like, hey, you know, kind of like Skyrim. You're like, I want to get to that top of the mountain. It's going to take me 2 hours, but once I get up there, who knows what I'm going to find? Hidden mini boss, main boss, special loot, secret Easter eggs. And that is the biggest thing about Borderlands franchise, is all these elements, the Easter eggs, all the funny references they have. And with having such a big open world, I'm just absolutely blown away by these statements and super excited what they're going to be bringing to the table for Borderlands 4. We do not have a long ways to go, guys. Let me know what you guys are most excited for Borderlands 4 and what you hope they do not bring back or implement into the title. I appreciate every single one of you guys. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like on it as it helps me and the channel grow, and subscribe for all Borderlands content. I know I make a ton of content here on the channel, but I just want to make content on games I love. I appreciate every single one of you guys, and as always, stay happy, stay hyped, and have a beautiful day.